Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles, Brian McElfresh, and Doug Gravely.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is the CFB Dynasty College Fantasy Football Podcast with a somewhat special edition today. This is the Hurricane Helene edition. My name is Matt Knowles. As always, I am here alongside of the founder and the creator of CFB Dynasty, Brian McElfresh. Brian, what do you think about the fact that we got a storm out there churning in the Gulf of Mexico right now?
I mean, we do this every year, right? We had a similar hurricane show last year. It's just not affecting a Florida game, which normally brings disappointment. But hey, if there was some way to just, keep the Gators from playing again and being terrible in the swamp, it would be great. But nope, we got a bye week. It's not really affecting much of fantasy. The one thing about this storm is that it's coming through really fast. It's a massive storm, but it'll more affect, the Carolinas and Georgia instead of state of Florida teams.
Yeah, so for those of you guys that are wondering, we are both located in north central Florida, so the eye of the storm is going to pass pretty much parallel to us if it stays on the current track. We'll definitely get some wind here, definitely some things like that. One of the phenomenons that if you're not in Florida that is happening right now is just seas upon seas upon seas of parking lots full of power trucks. Like they'll stage so that way once once the storm goes on land, they'll all go from the staging area and go try to help get the power back on. I was just at a comic convention this past weekend, and right now the parking lots where this comic convention is literally nothing but power trucks. So it's pretty crazy, crazy. But
it's wild. If you saw Tampa at like 9 a.m., storm surge was already happening like 12 hours before impact. So other than flooding and stuff, which probably won't affect stadiums, I don't think the fantasy impact will be much down here. But yeah, we'll see where it goes after the weekend. But it's such a fast storm that we expect to be able to play our whatever youth soccer league tomorrow night, even though the storm's coming through today.
Yeah, so on that note, as of this show, there are no FBS games that have been affected. There's one FCS game, Florida A&M, Alabama A&M, that got moved to the end of November. But as of the show right now, there's no other games. Luckily, as BMAC said, for the state of Florida, Florida State, Florida, Miami, South Florida, UCF, none of them are playing in where the path is going to be. The things we need to watch out for is the fact, they're in Atlanta, Tennessee, Western Carolina. Those areas are talking about what's the impact going to be because the storm is moving so fast. So make sure that you've got some backup set. Fantrax does have a tool that they try and use. I know with the leagues we have, most of the leagues will actually have something text-wise with the guys in the league. Hey, here's my backups if a game doesn't play or it gets postponed. Make sure you have a contingency plan so that way you don't get hung out to dry, pun intended, by somebody you think is going to play and their game gets postponed to a later date.
Yeah, we've got, the tracker is definitely it's going to be a lot of wind too, like in Georgia, Carolinas, Tennessee. So you're going to want to avoid kickers. So it's really going to make its way through Atlanta Friday. So it might not affect that as much, but there's definitely going to be wind from this storm affecting passing and kicking up in the middle part of the country.
All right, well, good stuff. So hopefully, not that we want, the people in the Big Bend area of Florida to get smashed with the direct hit from an eye, but better that area than coming through this area. So hopefully we can stay safe and sound, and we can go from there. On that note, you guys want to talk some college fantasy football, and that's why we're here. So Brett Pagney, thanks a lot for being in the chat. Todd Skids, thanks a lot for being in the chat. We love seeing you guys out there interacting and being a part of this with us. So right off the bat, we want to go back to our panic meter. It's a fun segment that we've had for the last couple of weeks. So BMAC, why don't you hit that drop and then we'll go to the panic meter.
Emergency. Please remain calm.
All right, so what is the panic meter? These are players that have gotten onto our radar Maybe they're underperforming and they're consistently underperforming. And we try to take a look at where they're at and should their panic meter be going up? Should it be coming down? This week, we just took a look at some of the players that were already on the panic meter from last week. And we wanted to say, just to take a look at what their performance was. Did their panic meter go up? Did their panic meter go down? The first one on the list, we've actually seen people trading this guy away. We think it's ridiculous. We think if you're somebody that has traded away Ollie Gordon and you're in one of our leagues, shame on you. You know who you are. Throwing off the trade market by trading Ollie Gordon. But we understand why. Ollie Gordon, consensus top 3 running back preseason. Last 3 weeks, 49, 41, 42 yards. Has completely disappeared fantasy-wise. You should not be starting him. Last week, we had his panic meter at 1. Now the panic meter goes all the way up to 6 because right now, you need to see him do something. If you start Ollie Gordon, you're starting him based on hope. You're not starting him based on production. We've got to see something out of him more than 49, 41, 42 yards. What do you think about that, BMAC? Do you think that panic meter is too high or not high enough?
We knew it was a tough matchup, right? Utah's really good. They're always sound against the run. So I think the variance of the panic meter after a Utah game is tough. Maybe we should have had it higher the week before because they played at Tulsa. They've played Arkansas, which is good, not great defensively. Yeah, I think a 6 is valid. We've got road games coming up against Kansas State, BYU, home game against West Virginia. I'm not going to feel good starting him. So I think a panic meter overall of a 6 is completely validated. 1/4 of the football season's gone already. The fantasy part of it, at least. So while that's a really sad statement, like, hey, you got to see from Ollie Gordon, who was a top 3 pick in most drafts. And who could have seen it coming though? Like that's not a predictable thing.
Where not at all. Not at all.
Because these are the same O-line returning. Yeah.
These are the same. On? Yeah, these are the same teams that he played last year and he crushed. And this year, he's non-existent in their offense. I think the reason why last week we had it so low is because we looked at seasonal leagues versus dynasty versus college to pro. If you have him in a dynasty or college to pro, Ollie Gordon still is probably going to be a really good professional. So that's why we had it low. But if you're in a seasonal league, Ollie Gordon right now is not somebody that's going to be winning you games. That's not good.
Yep.
Next on the list, Jalen Moss, wide receiver, Fresno State. He did absolutely nothing to get himself off of the panic meter. His stats were consistent with where he's been, which in my mind means his panic meter goes up. Again, a quarter of the season is gone or a third of the season's gone by. Panic meter was at 5. Now it's at 8. He has done nothing, and his number of targets have done nothing to show us that he is going to be a go-forward part of the Fresno State offense the way that you want him to be. Yep. What do you think of that, B-Mac?
Yeah, totally agree. And, on the receiver side, Mac Delina's kind of taken over as that primary target that we thought Moss was going to get. Moss had a really good year last year, especially when the main target went down. His name escapes me right now. But anyways, we both liked Moss a lot going into the year. I don't exactly remember off the top of my head where we had him ranked going into the season. It's not like he was a top 30 player or anything, but in that offense with the size and speed and everything looked like it was going to align to do well. And sometimes we're just a year ahead. Maybe next year is his year because he's still a really young player. So it's not like a keeper or dynasty league. Is he a cut? I don't necessarily think that, especially if you're in a deeper league where there's less on the waiver wires. But I like Jalen Moss, just not producing, man. If it's a seasonal league, I'm cutting him.
Yep, I can feel you there. So the next guy, Noah Smith, we had his panic meter last week at an 11 because his stats have just been atrocious. Last week, however, he was targeted 8 times. It was only 38 yards, but you've got to follow the targets. If you're a receiver that gets targeted 8 times, that means they're trying to involve you in the offense. His 38 yards is not enough for me. His panic meter was at 11. Pulled it down to a palatable 9 this week. still unplayable unless you've got no other choice. He should not be in your starting lineup. I've got him down from a 9. What do you think about that, B-Man?
I mean, a quarter of the season in, and you're 9 catches, 57 yards, and no touchdowns. Yeah, he's unstartable in any format.
So real quick, Brett just made a good break. Pagny he wants to go back to the Jalen Moss comment. He's like, the Fresno State coach screwed me last week, not playing Malik Sherrod and not letting anyone know. That was a big surprise too, because he was nowhere to be, not on an injury report, not on our injury reports, and he just didn't play. That was very surprising.
That was surprising, and that is where that backup tool comes handy. If your league has it, it's really just a toggle, and then you can set your backups and fan tracks. Nobody knew that was coming. A lot of people I saw complaining about it on X, and yeah, I'm sure that's the kind of thing that screws up bets and stuff. Well, what you like to see though is the backup running back didn't do so well while he was out. So I'm surprised that stuff's still happening with as much gambling's happening in college football right now. So that was brutal, and certainly injury reports need to be normalized across the sport, as well as a lot of other things.
Maybe Fresno State moving to this potentially revamped Pac-12. Maybe there's going to be some different guidelines in that conference next year coming up outside instead of the Mountain West. So yeah, definitely not a Fresno State thing. It's definitely an all college thing. Okay, so Squirrel White, listen to this. Listen to this nonsense. Coming into the season, we thought Squirrel White was going to be the guy at Tennessee. Last week, he had a grand total of 6 yards of offense, 13 yards receiving, -7 yards rushing. He did have his most targets of the year at 4, but come on now, that is pathetic. Pathetic. Panic meter is going to stay at a 10. Keep him on your roster now if you are in a dynasty or if you're in college to pro. He still has the potential there. But if you're in a seasonal league, you should have already gotten rid of him. That is, you can't waste a spot on that.
What'd you have the panic meter at with Squirrel?
Squirrels at panic meters 10? At 10 right now.
So I watched that game, and it was over in the first quarter. Like, Oklahoma couldn't do anything. They put in the backup, and he's going to get the start this week, which is pretty interesting to see how that goes. Tennessee wasn't in need of throwing the ball. They ran it a lot, and they used a bunch of running backs, which I was thankful because I was playing against you with what's his name at running back. Anyways, I would put it more at a 7.5. And
you think so?
Let's see one of these games where they have to throw and how many targets he gets. Maybe 8.5. But
I was gonna say. So BMAC is gonna put a 7 to an 8 on a guy that's gotten 13 targets in 4 games.
It's not ideal.
Not ideal. Not ideal at all. Not ideal at all. But yeah, Squirrels. He is consistently underperformed. It's not like you could say he had one good game. He didn't do like some of the other guys out there that had one great game. He has consistently been absolute, dog vomit this year. Doesn't mean he's not a good athlete. Doesn't mean he's not going to do something. But from a seasonal fantasy perspective, he has definitely not been somebody that's going to do good for you.
It could be that the Tennessee offense, in terms of receivers, until they find a go-to, they might just be best ball type of receivers where one will pop off and then Deontay Thornton will get a long one. And if it's reliant on long touchdowns, it's not great for consistency, which we'll talk about with the consistency tool launching here at the end of the show.
I think one of the biggest problems for Tennessee, and there's not any problems, is that they just are so good with a running quarterback and with a Dylan Sampson as a running back that they are just so powerful at that point. Like you said, they may not have to throw because they're just crushing everybody with their running game. Next up, Damian Martinez for Miami. Last week we had him on the panic meter. 3 carries for 3 yards last week was pathetic. Last week, 11 carries, 31 yards, 3 touchdowns. Yes, he did get 29.1 points last week, which is great. Absolutely what you want to see out of Damian Martinez, but his number of carries still is concerning to me. Only 11 touches. For me, that panic meter needs to stay at a 5 because it's not like he went from 3 carries to 25 carries and he was definitely going to be the bell cow. You could see him this week having 11 carries for 31 yards and not score, and he's back to 3 points. So I think his panic meter stays at 5. Now, if he has another decent week, maybe it goes down a little bit. But what do you think of that, BMAC, not moving his panic meter at all?
I think that's legit. And 5 is totally fine. We got to see those carries go up. So if you had to pick, who would you rather have right now, Damian Martinez or Ollie Gordon?
Okay, are we talking seasonal? We're talking seasonal? Man. Seasonal, I would say Damian Martinez. That's tough because at any point, Ollie Gordon could become the second half of the season monster like he did last year. But it's tough to just go based on hope. He had the Oklahoma State offense has not shown us anything to believe in the fact that he's going to be the guy again this season. It doesn't mean who's a better athlete? I don't know.
They're both great proven running backs in fantasy. So that's why I asked the question.
I think Damian Martinez, I think that I have a feeling that's tough. That's tough. Yeah, I just think Damian Martinez, man, I think he's probably doing a little more, with his touches right now. What would you pick? I'm going to put it back on you. Who would you take for the rest of the season? Seasonal league only.
I would go back to the original rankings. Yeah, back half of the year, you're hoping for him to pop off. I'd go with Ollie Gordon.
Yeah, I'm definitely not cutting either one of those guys, but my goodness, That's just tough. All right, I'm going to let you talk about the last guy on the list because he's one you specifically had pinpointed last week, Caden Salter. Take it away.
Yep, Caden Salter. Here we go again. Another quality win for Liberty. Salter still just 1 turnover on the whole season. 4 touchdowns, but yards were low. So 28.5 points is not what you're looking for from a guy that you spent a first-round pick or an early second-round pick on most likely. So panic meter, we had it a 6.75. It drops to a 6.72 for you. I'd give it a 6.51. I feel like I can see things turning around. I watched a little bit of the press conference, and the coach was asked specifically about Salter, and he was just talking about how he's making more mature decisions as just a true quarterback who, wants to make it into the NFL. So where he might have run last year, now he's, buying another second and getting the ball downfield or hitting a check down or whatever. So all of that dialogue, though, from the coach is way worse for fantasy. So let's see. We'll see if the Liberty offense can certainly take off. They've had some injuries at running back, so they're not fully synced yet, clearly. So we'll see if that changes. Kind of similar to Ollie Gordon conversation. You want to see if they can get back in sync and turn things around from a fantasy perspective. Because Salter, so let's say you don't have Salter on your team. I do think it's a good trade target now. You've got a quarter of the season in. He's not performing well at all. But if you look at the Liberty schedule, it doesn't get any more ideal for the fantasy playoffs, and he's startable here on out, provided that he can turn it around from a points perspective. So a trade for target, possibly, if you believe it there's certainly some risk. What do you think about that, Matt?
You know what? I agree with you on that. I think the thing with Caden Salter right now, if you look at his 4 games this year, he's averaging about 20 points per game. His floor and his ceiling aren't that far apart. Even though he got 4 touchdowns this past week, he's averaging, I think it's 10 on the low side and 28.5 on the high side. It's not like he has a 1-point game and a 50-point game. So what you just need is to see Salter just kind of increasing just a little bit. And this past week was a good encouragement there. I definitely think you might be able to get him on a buy low situation. If you're somebody that has him, you might not want to be trading him because you probably aren't going to be able to get top value for him. But yeah, the biggest thing for me, the reason why his alert is so high, why his panic meter is so high is because, again, like BMAX said, he could be, he's probably somebody you invested a first round pick in or high second in. And do you want to go give up on that high first or high second pick a quarter away, a third of the way through the season? That's what makes it tough with him.
Yeah, he's about 13 fantasy points per game less than his average from last year. So the potential for that ceiling to go up is definitely legit. As Liberty goes along in their schedule, and if they remain undefeated and in the mix for the college football playoff, that auto bid for the best group of five, maybe we see him more aggressively run, and maybe he just doesn't need to yet. So the potential's out there for him to take off. Certainly hasn't shown it yet this year.
All right, so that's it for the panic meter right now. If you guys have players that you want to see us discuss on the panic meter, make sure that you're putting it in the Discord chat. Let us know so that way you can go in there. We can put them onto the put them into the list so that way we can talk about. The first time we did the panic meter, we had a ton of comments, a ton of suggestions from the peanut gallery, so to speak. So definitely let us know so we can look into some guys that maybe you want to hear about. So that's it for the panic meter this week. Now we're going to turn our focus and shift it to going forward, and we're going to look at some news and notes.
News and notes around college football.
All right, news and notes around college football. Right now, Nick Anderson, wide receiver, Oklahoma. He's listed as out. He played sparingly last week, but now he's back on the injured list. He has really much done nothing. Guy with a lot of hope, a lot of hype behind him coming into the season, but he's basically just amounted to nothing right now because of his injuries. Coming out of UNLV, we've got a definite story that BMAC and I are going to talk about after this. Michael Allen, running back UNLV, is headed to the transfer portal, looking to go to his third school after transferring from NC State. And then Matthew Sluka, the quarterback from UNLV, has voluntarily decided to redshirt, most likely headed to the transfer portal. He feels like he was wronged by the NIL collective. So we're going to talk about the situation at UNLV when we get done with this segment. Connor Weigman, quarterback, Texas A&M, good to go for Saturday. Quinn Ewers, quarterback, Texas, considered 50-50 for Saturday. Is there a legit QB controversy after Arch Manning's performance recently? Cason Wiseman, quarterback, FAU, is going to get an increased workload and split time on Saturday. Not that any FAU quarterback should be in your lineup, but with news like this, they definitely shouldn't be. Jack Turner, quarterback, Louisiana Tech, he's listed as a co-starter. And again, if you have co-starters on the field, you have no starters in fantasy. And then last but not least, Sire Gaines, running back from Boise State. He's good to go Saturday. He is backing up the best running back in the country in Ashton Genty, but he's still an intriguing flex option. When he gets his hands on the ball, he does the most that he can with it. That's our quick news and notes for this week. So we hope you guys can put that into your lineup decisions, because right here at CFB Dynasty, we want to help you take your fantasy experience to the next level. So BMAC, let's go back and take a look at that UNLV situation. You've got their quarterback, their running back, both saying, you know what, we don't feel like playing anymore this season. What do you think about that? Do you think that is? What do you think about this trend of players just arbitrarily deciding for whatever reason that they're done playing for the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that they were undefeated, and I think coaches poll or whatever, 23rd, something like that. So in the mix for that last spot in the college football playoff, or that group of five spot, against Liberty, etc. So unfortunate, obviously, if just as a fan of the sport, it's not something you want to see. Of course, there's negativity. Oh, he quit on his team and all that stuff. And that's all true. And maybe there were promises that were broken and all that stuff. So it's just sad to see. It's sad to see the sport's not set up for long-term. It's not in the best interest of the kid's development to take his 42% completion percentage into the portal and hope he ends up in a better spot. It could have been a special season that he remembered forever, but we'll never know. So, Ricky White affected a lot here from a fantasy perspective. So he's not been good. Maybe he has a better rapport with the new quarterback that has already been announced as the starter this week by the UNLV staff. So would like to see that, because you never know. Like that's what changed for Savion Williams last year when they had the quarterback injury happen, and Chandler Morris went down. Savion Williams for TCU, his production went up a lot, and maybe we'll see that for Ricky White. Hopefully we will.
The thing that's frustrating to me about this situation, we have a couple examples. of this kind of situation happening. Last year, MJ Morris for NC State, he played 4 games and then said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go into the portal. Actually, he said, I'm just going to take my red shirt. And he said, then I'm coming back. Nobody believed he was going to come back the next season. He then did go into the portal. But fantasy is not set up as well for a guy just deciding, hey, I'm just quitting on my team. You can't predict that. You can't predict. I mean, an injury is an injury. We all know injuries happen. But a guy just quitting on the season is tough because you may have a pick invested. You could be in a league like ours where you've got a limited player pickups, and that completely screws you because the guy just decides to quit. I would rather have it be a situation like what happened with Damian Martinez, where he felt like the NIL collective did him dirty, but he made his move in the offseason so that you could prepare in your drafts. You could prepare when he went to his new school. You could look at who was going to be there at Oregon State. It just kind of sucks that a kid can do this in the middle of a season. By the way that the rules are, really hurts the team. Like you said, could be going to a group of 5, be the group of 5 spot in the playoff, hurts you in fantasy. I'm not a fan of this kind of stuff at all.
Yeah, no, it sucks all around for sure. And just the sport in general, the portal, the hiring and firing portion of the season, the calendar overall. There's a lot of things that will be regulated by the conferences here, hopefully sooner than later, when the dust settles on the alignment. But from a fantasy perspective, yeah, hoping more for from Ricky White. He would be a trade for target for me. I think this news affects it. Like, Sluka ran the ball a ton, and his completion percentage again was in the low 40s, which is really pathetic for a starting quarterback. So you're expecting a quarterback that's a starter in college football to at least be up around 60%, and low 40s is way on the bottom end. So let's see more from Ricky White. I'll make a trade for him now if I can.
Ricky White's been on that radar for you all preseason and season. And we got a bunch of people out there that have been watching back and forth. Make sure you throw a comment in the chat. Let us know you're there so we can shout you out. So that's our conversation about news and notes for now. Well, we know you guys want to see the rankings. So BMAC, why don't we go pull those rankings up? Let's talk about the rankings for week 5.
All right. So there's just the defensive rank from a fantasy perspective against that position. So controversy right here with the number 1 quarterback we have listed, Jackson Dart, because you saw what Kentucky did at home against Georgia, where Georgia ended up winning by a couple points, a really low scoring game. Kentucky's defense was great. So I'm starting Jackson Dart, I'll say. But Ole Miss is at home, hosting Kentucky. Ole Miss is projected to score about 35 points. And so I've got him there. Do you have hesitation on Dart against that defense, or would you rather start Ward or Mateer or Chandler Morris that we have 2, 3, and 4?
You know, it's hard for me to say there because, you know, they are playing at home, and, you know, a lot of times in this kind of situation, the stats don't lie. Jackson Dart's a great quarterback. I feel like out of those guys in the top 5, I think that Mateer is become the must start player every week. If you've got John Mateer on your team, you don't trade him. And if you're somebody that would even think about shame on you, what are you
fired at William? Oh my goodness.
Why would you trade John Mateer? Come on. But yeah, I think that if I had to choose out of those top 5, I think Mateer is the guy I would. I think Arch Manning, I think the only reason why I would be concerned about that is, does Quinn Ewers get any snaps in that game? I mean, I think it's crazy. I think it's crazy there. I mean, the way he's played, maybe just let Arch keep playing right now until, you know, go hot hand. But I think that's the only reason why Arch has any concerns for me in the top 5, just because they're saying that Ewers could be 50-50 to be able to play.
Texas is one of my favorite defenses of the week to start. Mississippi State is starting. We don't talk about defense much on the show, but Mississippi State's starting a first-time starter with the injury to Chapin. So Arch Manning, yeah, if he gets the start, I mean, Mississippi State's pitiful offense, defense. So Florida was even able to win on the road. I had no idea what was going to happen in that game, but I like Arch a lot as a top 5 start this week, if indeed he gets the start. There was a little debate between Mel Kiper and another announcer, just going back and forth on who's the better pro potential overall, Manning versus Quinn Ewers. And they both said Manning, and I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's hard to take a Manning and not say he's going to have pro potential. Just the lineage, just the bloodline right there, as kind of tough. I mean, for Eli Manning of all people to now be most likely headed to the NFL Hall of Fame. When he was in college, nobody thought that was going to be the case. When he went to the pros, nobody thought that was going to be the case. But he's probably going to the Hall of Fame with his brother, Arch Manning. I'm not saying he's a Hall of Famer. I'm saying there's a bloodline right there in that family. You know, grandfather, uncles. That's intense for him.
I'm going to throw this up on the screen for you, a shout out request.
All right, here we go. Trevor Womack, Thomas Cernick, what's up, fellas? You guys are big fans. We are shouting you out right here on the CFB Dynasty podcast. Thank you guys for being such big fans. Boom.
You did that so much better than I would. Thank you. You know, one that's really interesting here in the top 10 is Blake Horvath. So this is where we've got some data here, obviously, to go on, where you see total fantasy points and fantasy points per game, and you've got the implied score, and everything looks good there for Horvath. However, when we look at the consistency metric, the consistency tool, actually, why don't we just do it? Why don't we just do it now?
All right, cool.
I've got quarterbacks ready. I really just want y'all's feedback to get.
So BMAC was working on this literally right up until the second that we launched. This is a brand new. We've talked about this before, but he's finally getting ready to start releasing this out there for you so you can see consistency. So BMAC, let everybody know what the QB consistency tool is and why you think it's important.
Yes. So whenever I'm setting my lineup, part of what I want to see is a trend. And in reality, like having this data alongside all of the other data on this other sheet is just not feasible. It just is too much information, and I think it wears people out. I love looking at spreadsheets, but I know that's not most people's jam. So I have this separate tool here so obviously this is good, where you can see, all right, Jackson Dart against Kentucky at home. Kentucky's 17th against quarterbacks in fantasy points, and then Jackson Dart's averaging 34 a game. We've got the spread, the over-under, and the projected points for Ole Miss, 34.5 against Kentucky. Well, then you can come back here and see, all right, well, how is Jackson Dart trending? How is he doing overall? So the number that we have here isn't how many fantasy points were scored, because I think the better metric is where did they finish the week in the quarterback rankings. So you can see here, week 1, John Mateer was QB2. So this gives you the metric. All right, you know how you're doing against other guys in your league, essentially. That's the more important metric. It's not necessarily how many they scored, but how did you do against your competition head to head? So if you have Mateer, like, this consistency is off the charts, where he was QB2 week 1, QB6 week 2, QB13 week 3, and then last week 4, QB3. Jackson Dart's not far. He was 3rd, 34th, 9th, and 10th. So you've got a good advantage if you have that kind of consistency. One thing I will note that we don't have figured out quite yet is the bye weeks. So they're going to show up here as a rank. So like Jalen Milroe, for example, Alabama was on a bye. So it shows him as 6th, week 1, QB 21, week 2, QB 2, week 3, and then QB 188, which is just not the case. They were on a bye week last week. So that is something I still have to figure out how to handle that. But we were looking at Blake Horvath for Navy. he's averaging 38.9 fantasy points per game. However, he goes 87, and then week 2 he was 3rd. Week 3, I'm assuming it was a bye. It's week QB 247, and then maybe not. Maybe he went negative. And then week 4 last week he was QB1. So huge variance there, and of course the Navy offense. A lot of the time, the defense will kind of dictate in that kind of offense who gets the ball. So that one is tough to start with confidence, but this is here to provide extra confidence.
So let us know in the Discord chat, what do you guys think about this tool? Do you think it's going to be helpful? Obviously, Big Mac is going to roll out running backs, wide receivers. There's probably going to be different groupings, because if you have quarterbacks, I think we got what you said, 1 through 12 is going to be the darkest green, and then 13 through 24 is going to be a little bit lighter, and so on and so forth down the color scheme.
Bit of a pukey green there. Yeah.
You're probably going to see those numbers open up a little bit, because you can only start one quarterback in a week. If you're starting a quarterback that finished in the 30s, you didn't do a good job, but you could start a running back in the 30s and be just fine, because you could have 36 running backs potentially starting in your league.
Yep.
So yeah, let us know what you think about this tool. This is actually up on the site right now, correct? This is something that
it's
subscribers
not accessible,
can go.
but it is up on the site, so it will be accessible at some point. And then I've got to get running backs, wide receivers, tight ends done, but super important. I like to. I mean, momentum in game is a big deal. I think momentum from week to week is a big deal for how everyone's trending. And I do have an idea. We talked about it a little bit pre-show for having a projected points per game, because I've had people reach out, multiple people via email, Discord, whatever. Can we get deeper weekly rankings? So I've got an idea for you if you're interested in that. So where we can maybe go 100 deep, and I just want it to be as accurate and data-based as possible. Right now, it's manual based on the data is how it's done every week. So it takes hours to put together. But again, I've got an idea. So it's something I'll kick out in the Discord, kick to Matt, and see what you guys think. But yeah, overall, I think there, in terms of quarterbacks this week, there's just not a lot of points. It's not like normal where you're getting into conference play and there's some, I don't know. It seems like the over-unders, et cetera, are just a little lower this year.
It's a weird week this week. I agree with you completely. Yeah. So let me go back we're back looking at the rankings. So the one other guy I want to point out on here, somebody that I've always been high on, and it's been feast or famine. 24 for Shedeur Sanders. I'm not saying that ranking is anything different than it should be this week, but if you saw the end of the Baylor game, how insane the end of the Baylor game was, the kind of completions he was making, the things he was doing to actually snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, where in previous years, it could have been the other way around, where Colorado was falling apart at the end of the game. That could be something to keep your eye on, because that could be the thing that helps Colorado get boosted into the rest of the season by having an incredible game. Hail Mary to catch at the end of the game to send it to overtime after getting completely screwed on a first down call. I mean, there was a call at the end of that game where there was a mark that was probably 3 yards off from where it should have been, that almost cost Colorado that game. It was one of the worst first down or spots that I probably have ever seen. It was literally about 3 yards back from where it should have been. Almost cost Colorado the game, forced them into a situation to have to throw a Hail Mary. But they did get that W. We'll talk about Colorado a little bit later.
So, North Dakota State week 1, Sanders ends as QB 10 in fantasy. At Nebraska, he ends as QB 108. And then QB 24 at Colorado State, QB 20, home against Baylor. So at UCF is really going to be an interesting game. I think my confidence can be affected a lot by how he performs this game, given the rest of the schedule. So
yes,
I feel like UCF is, they're not Nebraska defensively, but they're also better than North Dakota State, and Colorado's got to travel all the way to Central Florida. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
This week, my confidence, I feel good about kind of where we have him ranked. Right
I
now.
think the ranking is right. I think the reason why you need to pay attention is because last year they had about the same time in the schedule. They had that Stanford game where they were crushing Stanford. Stanford was not a good team last year, and they let Stanford come all the way back. Alec Ayamanor had his career game against Colorado, and they lost that game. And basically, Colorado wasn't the same after that point all season. They were just terrible. Yeah. Maybe this is the reverse that happens after that incredible come-from-behind victory versus Baylor, but we'll have to see. Anyways, let's move on to the running backs.
Running backs, Genty is number one. RJ Harvey, man, so good. 35 fantasy points per game, 38 for Genty. Jaden Blue had a 3-touchdown game last week. He's coming in at number 3 against a really poor Mississippi State defense. Like, Texas is going to be able to name their score in this one, even though it's an SEC matchup. Mario Anderson, if you look at his schedule the rest of the season, this is a must get now if you want him kind of guy. He's a RB4 for the week, and he's coming off of a bye and a tougher opponents. They played Florida State, etc. The rest of the schedule is cake. The fantasy playoff schedule is ideal. Like, he's a guy you're going to want to have down the stretch. And then Henry Parrish here, Ole Miss's RB1 against Kentucky, but still Ole Miss is projected to score 35. So we've got Henry Parrish, because he scored 23 a game, sitting there at number 5. What stands out to you?
Henry Parrish making me feel like a fool. I mean, I, for good reason, cut him in the off season. I did not feel like that was going to be a good place for him to transfer into a potential RBBC. But yeah, he's now making me eat my words. The thing that stands out to me is you look at some of the big names, guys that are almost always near the top of the rankings, and where they kind of slotted out this week. Omarion Hampton at 14, Kyle Monangai at 18. Then you keep going down a little bit farther. Ollie Gordon, we've talked a lot about him, 39th. Jonah Coleman, a guy that's on my radar a lot, somebody that we've talked about, potential pro running back at 40. So it's just interesting seeing guys that have been near the top of the standings, near the top of the rankings, but that just goes down to the stats. Look at the opponent, look if they're playing home or away, look at all the different variables. That's why it's not just a simple thing of let's just throw the best guys at the top of the list, because you never know how the games are going to fall out.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, when I go through this process every week, so, all right, here's my process. All right, I wake up on Sunday. You had Ashlock starting at midnight local time, so I wasn't going to stay up that late and know if I won or lost, which, Brett, you ended up winning the bet from last week when you predicted the game.
It was not even close. Not even close.
When I set my lineup that day on Sunday for the next week, and I was kind of shocked after I went through the data and looked at, all right, here's the projected points for, et cetera. Because I was thinking, all right, I'm going to start Marquez Cooper, LaQuint Allen for sure, and because they're playing against Holy Cross. But ended up Nick Singleton, of the running backs that I roster in the home league, was the number 1 guy on the rankings. So it did shift around kind of how I wanted to do things, because it's not always there, but you put the data in your favor and make the best decision you can. But yeah, I had Mahdi, Allen, and Marquez Cooper in, and they ended up being 20 through 24 ranked, whereas Singleton we have as RB9 this week. Penn State hosting Illinois, which it's going to be an interesting game to see if Illinois is able to move the ball on the ground. That one is, and in Happy Valley.
All right, so let's move on to the wide receivers. Once again, a lot of guys near the top that you would expect. Travis Hunter, complete freak of nature. we have never seen a guy that plays both ways like this. Where, I mean, he barely misses an offensive or defensive snap. It's funny. They've talked about the way that the coaches have to interact with him. Where, like, if you're the offensive coach and he's on defense, you got to basically be ready to run over there and do a one-on-one quick meeting with him before, the offense takes the field, because he's barely ever off the field. So to see him consistently, we're a third of the way through the season, still up there at number 4 as a wide receiver, is incredible.
You can't sit him. Like, Colorado they're not in that game without Travis Hunter. Like, he's just the best player on the field, period.
Definite Heisman candidate. Him, Ashton Genty are definitely two top guys right now that should be in that discussion. Will it be them? Will it be a quarterback? You never know. It always seems to be quarterback weighted, but the two of them are doing everything they can to make that case for the Heisman.
Yeah. Restrepo, still doing really good. He's averaging 19 fantasy points a game. He's been consistent. Miami hosts Virginia Tech. He's wide receiver 9. We've got Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver 10. And then Josh Kelly at 11. So I don't think there's any real surprises. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at North Texas. Sheffield has been the guy averaging 15 points a game. And then as you scroll down, we've got Damon Ward, who's been banged up the last couple weeks and maybe should have sat out and healed. He came out with the huge, 12, 13 catch, 200 yards, couple of touchdowns game week 1. And then he got banged up the next week and just hasn't really been the same. Like, he didn't finish the game a couple weeks ago. And then he played last week, I think 17 snaps or something like that. So he's a trade for target, Damon Ward, I feel like, where he came out with a bunch of targets week 1 and he's kind of been banged up, but the injury is not, heavily on the radar. It's not like in the Fantrax news or anything, I don't believe. So Damon Ward, kind of a low-key trade for target there. I like that potential in that offense. And against Tulsa this week, that's going to be one of the shootouts of the week, which used to be a segment that we did, but we could bring it back.
We'll see. All right, so we could go look at tight ends really quick. The only reason why we look at tight ends quickly is because there's not really a whole lot of change. The guys that have been performing are the guys that are still there. I feel like in the top 10, top 12, every name that's there is basically a name that's been there for the last couple of weeks. So, obviously Gadsden actually had a pretty crappy week last week. Gadsden only scored a couple of points last week, but tight ends normally aren't getting a whole lot of activity. Colston Leveland, hopefully he's over his injury. Otherwise, not really a whole lot to talk about coming out of the tight end room.
Yep. And of course, kickers and defenses down there. Yeah, of course, if you guys have questions or have start sit, hit us up. It's been a very, very, for me, busy season. So I'm sure I'm behind on some emails and things. And for you guys, I do apologize. It's not ideal, but I'm doing the best I can on some of these things.
Best thing to do, though, guys, is make sure you're posting that stuff in Discord. Don't be emailing BMAC. Post it in Discord. That way we can go in there and pull those things off so we can talk about them. I went up and looked this morning. I didn't see any new starts and sits. So, guys, that's on you. If you want starts and information, you got to get it to us so that way we can talk about it. All right, so that is it for the rankings. If you want to be able to have a chance to go and take a look at that yourself, that's why you need to be a subscriber to CFB Dynasty, so that way you can go in and manipulate the data the way that you need so that you can do your thing. All right, so now it's time for the brisket lock.
Oh, man, this one, this is you again, Matt. This is you.
This
is your segment. We need to rename this segment, honestly. It's not really about brisket anymore.
You gonna hit the drop or what, man?
I will, but what's your favorite food? What should it be?
No, man. This is the brisket lock. You got to risk it for the brisket. It's a good rhyme, man. That rhyme is the best rhyme. So we can't, it has transcended food products.
It's time for the brisket lock.
All right. So coming into this week, BMAC and I feel like I probably had the better brisket lock for the first 3 weeks. Week 4 is interesting, though. BMAC predicted he picked Phil Maffa for Clemson. 15.3 points. He only had 7 carries, but it was for 107
I
yards.
blame you. I blame you and your team.
My team was absolutely terrible last week. It was pretty rough. I was on the show Florida convention watching this on my phone, being pissed off the whole show because NC State got absolutely bludgeoned. They did come back at the end of the game and make it a game, but Phil Maffa didn't need anything more than 7 carries for 107 yards. So he only got 15.3 points, but not really his fault. When the other team doesn't really show a lot of opposition, that's what happens. Now, Caden Veldkamp was my pick. Caden Veldkamp, the Western Kentucky offense was non-existent. His stats were terrible for about the first 2-3 quarters. Then for the last part of the game, he decided he was going to show up. 27.68 points. You're happy that he did his Western Kentucky stuff at the end of the game, but we needed him to do that for the whole thing. So here's my analysis on the brisket lock this week. I kind of feel like it's a push. I say brisket analysis, the two of them get to sit over in the corner and share one plate of your brisket because neither one of them did enough to be able to get a full brisket of their own. What do you think, B-Mac?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I think they're probably positionally wise in a similar spot.
Yeah. If I had to give an edge, I would say the edge goes to you this week because you could get by with an RB3 with 15.3 points, but you're not starting more than one quarterback and you want your starting quarterback to get more than 27. Yeah. So maybe the edge goes there, but I feel like neither one of our briskets really did the job this week.
Yeah.
So this week, for the first time this season, completely apart from each other, B-Mac and I actually ended up picking the same brisket lock. We decided we were going to stick with it. I did put a secondary one down there. So if you guys are like, we ain't going to stand for this crap, we got to have 2 different briskets. So B-Mac, I'm going to let you take the guy that we both picked as our brisket lock this week. Who do we got?
Ishmael Mahdi against Sam Houston State. They're averaging giving up 4.56 or so yards per carry. And, one of the worst against the run. So I like Mahdi. Mahdi has run well. He has just kind of not got the right touches, hasn't broken those long ones, but they still exist in that offense. So it's going to come for Mahdi at some point. And this is the week.
I felt like this week was really tough on the brisket lock because I don't really feel like there's a lot of guys that were down the rankings that are probably going to perform better to the point that they were going to pop off as the brisket lock. So I say maybe he's an RB3 or a flex. I definitely don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to lead your running back room. But yeah, Ishmael Mahdi as well. But if you guys were like, man, bump this nonsense, you need to pick somebody else, I'm going to take somebody that's not even on the rankings this week. And we're also going to keep our eye on LeJontay Wester for Colorado.
I like this pick.
He's the one that had the incredible Hail Mary touchdown reception that sent the game to overtime last week. But listen to his stats over the last few weeks. LeJontay Wester has 13 receptions in the last 3 weeks. He's got 24 targets. So he had 16 points 2 weeks ago. He had 24 fantasy points and then 16 fantasy points. And he's got 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. That offense has got so many big weapons. There's 4 different receivers that could pop off at any time. So I'm not fully convinced that he's going to be a brisket lock. We're going to keep him on the watch. We're going to keep him on the list and see if we can see what happens with him. So that way we're still looking at least 2 players for this week upcoming. All right, we definitely want to know what you guys think about your brisket locks. Do you guys have a brisket lock that you're watching that is somebody that could come out of nowhere that's going to be great? We want to see you guys post it in our Discord, post it in the comments. Let us know who we might be missing out on. All right, last but not least, we got 2 things left. We're going to take a quick look at the Home, Open, and Masters League so that way we can shout out great performances, great coaching in our 3 different leagues that we have. And then we have 1 question from the Peanut Gallery. So BMX, let's pull up the Home.
I'm going to start with the Masters League, actually.
All right.
We got Dillingham and Harry Dog. Now 7-1, both of them, both with 1,300 points for. There's only 3 teams that have that. Saucy Dossie's in there also at 6-2, along with Mike Davis, Ruskers FC. So man, that's those top 3 are legit. Those teams are, you know, separating themselves points wise. We'll see if that continues, obviously.
Yeah, I had a good week last week in the Masters. Felt good about that because I had been really suffering in our leagues. I was able to sneak myself back into playoff contention. I've actually got the most points against this year out of the top 6. So it goes to show my games have been tough.
Relegation is in my path right now if the league ended right now. So I've got to get up a couple spots and knock you down a little bit.
Man, why you want to talk? Don't knock me down. Knock down CFB Tucker. Knock down Ruskers. Knock those dudes down. Come on, man. Yeah, and Doug Dynasty. You talk about relegation. He has got the second. I guess you and Doug both have got the 11th and 12th rated offenses right now.
Yeah, it's
so
rough.
Definitely got to do something there. Yeah, I got that doubleheader win last week, and that was huge. So which one are you pulling up now?
Over in this is the home league. Then I'll pull up the open league here in a sec. So, excuse me, Uncle Joe, famous Uncle Joe, undefeated. I get to play him this week. I'm excited. So I can't wait to see that one shake out. I feel like it's an opportunity here. Man, it's going to be fun. William and Josiah at 4-1, and then you and Sean and Rutgers there with me at 3-2. So we've got a pretty tight race. I can't believe already, Josh Reed's there at 2-3, San Diego State. But the rest of those teams, it's going to take not quite a miracle to make the playoffs because they're only like a couple games out. But it's still going to be tough sledding, it seems like, even though it's early in the season.
Got to call out Uncle Joe real quick again. Uncle Joe still doesn't know the rules to the league. Had to correct him on some stuff again this week. Come on, Joe, you're undefeated. You got to know the rules to the league, my man. Yeah, this one. I mean, when we drew the divisions coming into the season, we knew that this was going to be tough. Putting me in a division, NC State with Hawaii, Rutgers. We knew that the top 3 in that division were going to be huge. But shout out to Sean Howard at Florida State. Everybody in that division has got a winning record. You could see all 4 teams in that division make the playoffs. That's pretty intense. But yeah, we got a battle going on there. So I guess now the only thing we got to look at is the open league.
Moonlight Waffles. Like, we've got 2 7-1 teams here. Ante 1983, along with Moonlight Waffles 7-1. But Moonlight Waffles, Josh Reed, 1,500 fantasy points. He's more than 200 points better than everyone else in the open. So yeah, he's killed it.
He's already smelling the Masters League. He talks about all the time. He wants to be the champ and get to the Masters. I'll tell you though, Eansel 1983. He was my, if I remember correctly, he was my post draft pick for potentially the champ. He's doing great right there, man. So we might see both of those teams making it to the Masters in 2025.
Yeah. I see you, Todd Skids. I've got an idea, and I'll see what I can do formula wise here to make that happen for you. Deeper rankings is what he's hoping for, and me too. Honestly, if I can figure out this formula, it'll save me 2 to 4 hours a week. So that'll be nice. So one thing I've learned so far, and I already knew this going into the season, I'm just reminded of it. Like, when I feel so great about a player, like I feel like I was drafting in the middle of the first round everywhere, and I already had this guy in the home league. So I just had a natural affinity for him. I was already researching Torrey Horton. When a guy like that gets hurt and has a tough schedule too early in the year, that now they're on a bye week, I think, and hopefully he'll come back and be healthy after that. That wrecks every single league that you're in if you take him in the first round and he gets hurt. So I got work to do is what I'll say in these leagues to be able to make the playoffs. Too many injuries right now.
And we love being able to shout everybody out and talk crap. I mean, hey, we talk a lot of crap about the guys in the home league because we've been around with them for almost 2 decades. So it's all in good fun, except for Joe, man. Come on, you got to learn the rules, man. We're totally serious about that with you, buddy.
If Joe learned the rules, I feel like our lives would be downgraded. Like, this is just what we're used to. We like having the guy that drafts a player that's already been rostered for 2 years, or whatever. Like, stay the same, Joe.
And we know, and the thing is too, we call him Uncle Joe because Joe is actually related to Brian in that respect. So we know this just makes the Thanksgiving table, Christmas dinner, things like that much more interesting because of all the smack that we talk. So BMAC's the one that has to deal with that kind of crap on the holidays. So
Yeah,
it's that much
no
more
doubt.
fun. All right. So one last thing, questions from the peanut gallery. We only had one comment that needed to get shared, and that was Sir Mocha. He said 25% of the season's done. Could we get a re-ranking of the top 5 QBs, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends moving forward? Who stayed at the top? Who dropped off the face of the planet? Who came out of nowhere and looks now to remain a household name? That's a whole show in and of itself. Definitely can't cover all that today. Maybe we'll cover a little bit more of that later. We do intend on later on going back and taking a look at what the preseason rankings were versus what the overall stat leaders are now, seeing the guys that say they're obviously Ashton Genty is one you can look at from the very top of the thought process, that he is far and away exactly who we thought he was, the Dennis Green statement. There's other guys that have fallen up. We'll probably cover that a little bit later. I think the one guy who came out of
a question? Like similar,
yes.
Similar
What's your question? What's your question?
All right. So if we're drafting today, who's RB1?
Oh, I'd still draft Genty 1. There's no doubt.
Of course, that one's easy. QB1.
John Mateer.
With that schedule and
I'd still
as
draft,
much as he runs, yep.
I'd still draft Mateer just because he's just the number 1 quarterback right now. I'd still draft him 1. Who would you take? And that's one of those who came out of nowhere, looks to remain a household name. I think Mateer is definitely the guy.
Mateer, he totally could be the guy. Like, if you look at their schedule, it's just like they're playing against inferior opponents the rest of the year almost. So I would expect, like, if they were playing in the old, what we know as the old Pac-12, there's no way it would be Mateer because they're going to face opponents that are going to make him throw. I don't know that he's going to face teams like that on the schedule. So I think if you're drafting right now, Mateer might be QB1, which is absurd.
Yes. Especially if you're somebody that would think about trading him. I mean, come on, you got to keep a QB1 on your team. That's crazy. There had to be some side deal going on there. Come on now.
Question comes in: Caleb Johnson, RB2? Question mark.
That makes me so upset. I can tell you right now, in the off season, basically had a choice on our dynasty leagues. Do I keep Dylan Sampson, who was basically the goal line back at Tennessee, or do I keep Caleb Johnson, who was underperformed last year at Iowa from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, big time.
And I had a choice. I couldn't keep them both. Which one do I take? I took Sampson, and obviously I don't think you couldn't lose with either one of them, but it sucks seeing Caleb Johnson crushing it the way he's doing and knowing that he was on my team and I chose to cast him aside.
RJ Harvey's up there for me. I would put Mario Anderson RB2 right now because of the schedule. I think he's so good. I'm trying to get him right now. Mike Davis, respond to the trade. But working on it. So this is good. This is a good exercise. I think we should at least come up with our top 10. If we were before the next show, if we were drafting today, who's our top 10 quarterback, running back, wide receiver for the rest of the season? It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question for sure. Like you said, we'll try to cover those, so we can see did the numbers statistically play out. And I think honestly that helps you out knowing when you're setting up your teams for 2025. How much do you trust our rankings? How much do you trust them? Because clearly there's always going to be guys that are going to jump up. I mean, Mac Delana is a perfect example. He probably wasn't even somebody in the top 300 coming into the season. And Mac Delaney has become the wide receiver 1 for Fresno State. That's when you never expected right there. So
that's part of the fun of college football is you have players that mature at different times. They get in the right situation, and then they pop off out of nowhere, and that's part of the fun.
All right, so that's a show for this week. BMAC and I are going to have to talk about next week. Next week we might have to do this show a day early because I'm going to be out of town, but we'll definitely be getting a good show together. We have a lot of stuff we could potentially include in the show. Just want to give you guys that quick broadcast note, so to speak, that we might have to do it on a different day just because I'm going to be out of town. But hope you guys have had fun. Hope you guys, if you are in Florida, if you are in Georgia or South Carolina or Kentucky or Tennessee or North Carolina, that you stay safe with this potentially historic storm that's coming in. And, we hope you guys have fun watching some college football this weekend. And hopefully you guys win your games, unless you're playing me. And hopefully you can accept the defeat that hopefully is going to come your way if you're playing me. That's how I got to look at things. B-Mac, any final words from you before we get the heck out of here?
I'm coming for your throat, Joe. Coming for your throat in fantasy this week.
All right. So on behalf of the founder and creator of CFB Dynasty, Brian McElfresh, my name is Matt Knowles. We'll see you next time on the CFB Dynasty College Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the CFB Dynasty Podcast. Help us out by subscribing on YouTube and reviewing us on your podcast network.